In American society, money is a taboo topic. We're taught at a young age it's improper to talk about it, but we're also bombarded with messages about the power and importance of money in our everyday lives. And by not talking about it, we miss out on the skills and lessons we need to effectively understand and financially plan. That changes today. Welcome to Money Tales. Hosted by Sandy Brager and Cami Doder, Money Tales brings more than 35 years of combined professional experience in personal finance to demystify money and demonstrate what it's like to speak openly about personal financial matters. Join us each episode as they interview modern-day movers and shakers about how money decisions intertwine with their daily lives in order to give you better insight into productive financial conversations. Subscribe today and register for our blog Fathom at aspiriant.com/podcasts to increase your money mojo. And now, here's Cami and Sandy.
Dr. Marianne Cooper is our guest this week on Money Tales. Marianne has built a career exposing inequality while living inside it. As a sociologist and parent in Silicon Valley, she's seen firsthand how even the wealthy fear falling behind and how families across the spectrum quietly hustle to secure their children's futures. In this episode, Marianne shares what it's like to understand exactly how privilege is reproduced while trying to avoid passing it on herself. Let me tell you more about Marianne. She's a senior research scholar at Stanford University's VMware Women's Leadership Innovation Lab and an affiliate at the Stanford Center on Poverty and Inequality. Marianne is an expert on gender, women's leadership, inclusion, economic insecurity, and the future of work. Her book, Cut Adrift: Families in Insecure Times, examines how families are coping in an insecure age. Additionally, Marianne was the lead researcher for Sheryl Sandberg's New York Times bestseller, Lean In: Women, Work, and the Will to Lead. And she's an author on all of the Lean In and McKinsey Women in the Workplace reports.
Here are three key money topics Marianne hits on in this conversation. First, how she intentionally threads social awareness through the fabric of her children's financial education, transforming everyday money moments into lessons about the world we live in. Second, extreme inequality isn't just unfair, it's a destabilizing force threatening everyone's prosperity. But there's hope. There are known policy solutions waiting for political courage to implement them. And third, how the money tensions that many couples experience isn't the result of what can feel like personal shortcomings. Rather, they're often created by larger social systems at work. Understanding that distinction can be incredibly liberating. Now it's our pleasure to bring you Dr. Marianne Cooper's Money Tales.
Welcome to the Money Tales podcast. I am Cami Doder.
And I'm Sandy Brager.
Sandy, this past week, I was at a small industry gathering. This is a group that sees each other once a year, so we know each other quite well. And we're at one of the dinners, and I've stepped away for something, and I come back, and the two people across the way are telling stories about their upbringing, very similar upbringings around money. Full disclosure, it wasn't me that prompted.
Your antennas, Jody, going crazy.
They went up. I was really sad I didn't ask the question, but I was so thrilled to come in. And what they were sharing, both were raised in a real scarcity situation, and they were sharing the hard parts and the scary parts of it and all that. What really struck me was that now, as adults, they are financially very, very stable. Both are raising children, and how they are challenged by their kids having so much access and that balance. I think it's a comfort level of what their kids have and that they didn't have when they were growing up, and what kind of values they want to make sure that their kids both seem like they're doing amazing jobs. But it struck me as such an important part of that scarcity conversation. And then when you get out of scarcity.
Yes, I'm reading a book by some friends who are focused on wellness and using money to promote wellness. And I thought that was a really interesting twist on this situation of coming from one socioeconomic situation growing up and moving into another one where your children have a different experience than you. How wonderful it would be if we focus on values and also what the money can be used for in order to ensure wellness. Because what happens is sometimes people think that I learned a lot from having to scrap and work really hard to generate my career and make money. So my kids should have to do the same thing.
And it's hard to see your kids having a different experience than you did. And maybe you feel like you have your values because of your experience.
And there's a way to focus on those values and how to best develop the values you want in your children. But coming at it again from that wellness lens was something that I thought was pretty cool and something to think about, because maybe they don't have to work as hard as you do. And maybe that's okay. Maybe there's other experiences they can have where they can learn some of those same lessons or different ones that will serve them well.
I think that's an important framework to be looking at it from. I get the pleasure of pivoting our conversation to our guest today, Marianne Cooper. Welcome to the Money Tales podcast.
It's good to be here.
Would you briefly introduce yourself and share a couple pivotal moments that really impacted who you are today?
I'm a sociologist at Stanford, and I focus on gender and women's leadership. To build off the conversation you two were just having, it resonated with me because my mom sort of experienced that in the sense that she grew up in a family that didn't have a lot of resources. Money was very tight. She has memories of her mom doing the calculations. Will the money last this whole month, et cetera? My dad was a doctor. And so in marrying him, sociologically, we call class migration. So she moved classes from a societal perspective, moved up the income ladder. Early on in their marriage, money was very tight. My dad was in medical school, but then she had sufficient resources. And it's not just about worrying about paying the bills. There's all kinds of sociologically different social classes move through the world in different ways. Institutions often have middle class norms or expectations or like assumptions about what you can and can't afford. And so through me and my brother, my mom was traversing through a very different world a lot of the time. And I think I became a sociologist because she was often pointing things out to me about the world that I think if she hadn't had that experience and come from a working class family, I would not have noticed it because it would have just been my norm. She didn't have an opportunity to go to college straight out of high school because there was only enough money in the family for her twin brother to go. So there's enough money for the boy to go, but not the girl. My mom finished college at night when I was 10 years old. She graduated. You kind of remember those things. And she majored in social science, I should say. So I think for me, having a parent who was pointing this out all the time, these differences.
You were really aware of it.
Very aware. I think it, compared to probably peers in my similar social class, I was much more attuned to these kinds of things, which is what I think has led me to focus on inequality and issues like economic insecurity as well.
As you were growing up, when did you really connect with money? And when did it start having meaning to you, or what was going on at that time in your life?
It's interesting because within social science, we think of things like political socialization, like what was your first memory of thinking about politics? And you're asking me about money. I'm like, oh, huh. But there's like a family story that we have. It had to have been about 6 or something. I'm not sure exactly all the details that led up to this, but I remember feeling very strongly that my allowance should be $1 a week. Very, very strongly about this. My parents must have said no or something because I have such a clear memory. I packed up my Hello Kitty luggage and I walked down the hall and I said to my dad, if I don't get $1 a week for my allowance, I'm out of here. And he crumpled and started like laughing. I think it was endearing. I was so indignant about all of this. And he was like, yeah, that's fine, whatever. But that's like a very principled money thing. I don't know where like that amount came from. There's something in my recollection of it that my brother, who's older, must have been getting some amount. And I think they did it by age. I was always getting less than him.
It wasn't about what you wanted to do with that money. It was about fairness.
Yeah, it must have been. That's sort of what I focus on is the lack of fairness. I keep an eye out for that and attuned to it. So that's my first memory of it. My dad was a frugal guy, very, very frugal. That was also a big part of our family dynamic. I was just saying to my kids, like, I never considered going to a private university for college because why would you do that if you could just go to, I'm in California, we have a great state higher ed system. So just think that's interesting how it does trickle down into your consciousness.
Into your beliefs. That's a belief at that point.
Exactly. So my dad was very frugal, but my mom was very much, I think she was relieved to be able to have her children not have to worry about money so much. So there was quite two different vibes. And I do have memories of my mom. We'd go back to school shopping or whatever. She'd be like, hurry into the house and don't tell your dad.
That's such an interesting story.
It would physically pain him to spend money. He grew up in a very solidly middle class family. My grandfather was in the Air Force, and it's interesting, all of the emotions around that.
It sounds like these early experiences played a very big role in your becoming a social scientist. I'm wondering, Marianne, about some of those stories that your mom was pointing out to you when you were younger about a difference between her experience and yours. Do you remember any of those stories?
My mom grew up in a working class family, but also in a family that was very much in support of the labor movement. Her father started working in the post office and then became a part of his union. And he became the national president of the postal union much later in life. But paying people decent wages for their work and dignity at work were very big themes for me and both my parents, but particularly my mom. And the unfairness of social class, the idea that a lot of people are born on third base that think they hit a home run. And she would say, I grew up with many, many very brilliant and talented people who just didn't have the same opportunities as other people did. So we have a very strong social narrative in our country about meritocracy. But when you look at the data and look at the patterns, we really have such deep inequalities. We're not all starting at the same place with the same opportunities, both illuminating those, pointing those out. One time I was older, my mom said to me, with the newspaper, there's a business section, but there's not a labor section. Stories that get written are often more from the point of view of business, and labor gets wrapped up into that, but it's a different thing than coming at it from the worker's point of view. And I think when I took my first sociology class, a lightning bolt came down from the heavens. I think because it was everything I had been told my entire life, but it wrapped up in this academic knowledge and research and everything, and it just lit me up.
So you pursued that and you went deep on studying inequality. And there is sort of a meta thing going on here because I'm curious, how are you thinking about your own personal finances as you're studying and focusing on the inequality of different parts of our society? And I assume that it's mostly US focused, but maybe I shouldn't be making an assumption.
Mostly US focused. To study inequality and participate in the reproduction of inequality is a very interesting space psychologically and emotionally to be in. I wrote a book many years ago now on economic insecurity with families actually here in Silicon Valley, but looking at across the income spectrum. So low income, working class, middle class, and then very, very affluent families. This was before I had kids that I did all the research for the book. I remember the affluent families, despite being very well off, they were very anxious about their economic position and trying to understand what that was about. Through the course of my research, realizing it's because there's so much economic insecurity, even the rich are worried. And they're particularly worried about how they're going to reproduce their kids' class position. When middle class jobs don't exist like they did at one point, and how do you ensure their economic security, things like that. Those parents did a lot of things to get a lot of different opportunities and advantages for their kids. And I think about that a lot when I think about my kids and how, again, it's unfair. There are a lot of people who I think work on social justice issues and with inequality every day are like, I benefit from things that other people don't benefit from. And you really reconcile that. But I particularly feel it with my kids a lot of the time.
When you talk with your kids about this issue and fairness, how do you bring in money into this conversation?
A very concrete example is my oldest recently turned 16 and got her license. And I called to add her onto our insurance. It's just ridiculously expensive. Our cars are 15 years old. And it was very funny because the woman who was working for the insurance company, I feel like she must do this on a daily basis because she had all these things that she said to me.
Smelling salts to pick you up when you fainted?
Yeah. First one is there's the good student discount. And the second one that changes when they're 18, because I think I was just silent. What? And then thinking in my head, I have another one coming up. And she's like, oh yeah, and boys are even more. I'm like, what is going on? Anyway, it was a very funny conversation. But I was talking to my oldest about this and saying, I wasn't aware of it. And my daughter was hilarious because she's like, wait, you have to pay for insurance even if you haven't had an accident? I'm like, yes, that was funny. But I just want you to understand that having access to a car and having parents who can just pay for it is an unseen advantage. So you can drive to different jobs that you might want to have, or you can go to a school that's further away or whatever. Your life is much easier because you have parents who have the resources to do this. It's a dividing line that we really don't talk about very much. And at least where we live, public transportation is not great. If your parents don't have the several $1,000s a year, which is quite a bit of money to do this for you, I just wanted to make sure she saw it. And again, it's one of those moments I think about it. People who study these issues will talk about housing insecurity, transportation issues as massive obstacles for people being able to have stable economic lives. It's stuff we don't really think about. Her and her peers, a lot of them, their parents just pay for it without any commentary on the fact that it becomes another economic and social class dividing.
I'm curious, Marianne, what your daughter's reaction was to that. I have to be completely honest. I don't stop and think about those things all the time. That wouldn't have occurred to me to cover that in a conversation with my own children. And I'm wondering how she responded and whether the conversation continued from there.
I think in our household, because of what I do, it's always a conversation on many different social issues. I think we are having conversation. I keep joking that I'm looking forward to their memoirs about stuff. Anyone who grows up with a sociologist or is, in a relationship with one who specializes in inequality or gender, race or whatever, no matter what your parents do, they illuminate parts of the world to you that you wouldn't have otherwise. So it's just whatever it is. I don't think that this is the first time we've talked about these kinds of things. She got it. And I think then she asked me about who is paying for gas. She has a job. It's all these things become interesting questions. Building on one of the things you talked about is how much do you pay for? How much do you expect them to pay for? And I think in families, not only is it the negotiation between the parent and the child, if there's more than one parent or guardian or parental figure, it's then the negotiation between the parents, which you can have different economic experiences coming up. And my husband and I definitely did, just in terms of how our parents handled money. So then it's like a three-way discussion around who's paying for what and why, and what's fair is also very socially constructed in a family. What feels right.
Let's talk about that because I'm curious. How would you define fair for your family?
Just where I noticed these things more is that my parents paid for stuff. We talked about it, but they paid for stuff. My husband's family was much more like, you need to get a job and you need to pay for it on your own. There's a lot there, and that's important about paying your own way and learning to value money and things like that. But I tend to err on the side of how I was raised, and he tends to err on the side of how he was raised, and how it will come up. For example, with a conversation about college, I'll be like, they should major in whatever they're passionate about, whatever they're interested in. He's like, they need to get a job.
They need to make money. Yeah.
I think we're both right. You need to be mindful. Obviously, I think part of it is how you talk about what you do and what you know. And mostly this is all about learning how to think. And that skill is valuable for a lot of different jobs. But the kids, it's like they're watching a tennis match between their parents. It goes back to me, I'll make these points, and it goes back to him. But the other part of it too is linking it back to like family dynamics, particularly gender, anything like this process in a family then has to be managed. Who's going to pay attention to like how much my daughter works, and then we're going to pull the money out of her bank account? Like, how does that all work? The minutia of all those things is kind of an interesting thing. So I think I tend to err on the path of least resistance, which is maybe not great. I often end up just being like, oh, I'll get that because
it's just easier.
I don't know.
It's easy and you're busy. And
it's Friday. I'm tired. You want your kids to know the value of money. And I often talk about how I want them to walk through the world. There's a lot there, but I want them to walk through the world knowing the value of money and not spending it in ways that don't make sense. I trust that I've gotten them to where I think they should be in that. until I see otherwise, I'm not going to worry more about it because I have other things I'm managing on their calendar, all their doctor's appointments, all their other stuff. So I think it's just one of many things that you worry about. There are moments where you're like, oh, but they really need to know how to manage their money. Taxes just came up. And because my daughter has a job, I'm like, oh, we've really entered that. Like, it's a whole nother thing we have to talk. I can see why you have this podcast.
See, Marianne? And then learning what you're talking about is through real life experiences, which I think is really powerful. I'd love for our schools to talk more about money and teach more. But I do also think the practical learning is so powerful. Your daughter has a job, then taxes make sense because all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait a second. Taxes are taking a lot of money. I'm curious. You live in Silicon Valley. That's a part of this world. A lot of wealth is created through businesses and whatnot. And I'm curious how you experience your community and their relationship with money.
I've lived here my whole life.
You've seen the evolution.
I've seen it. This might sound pat, but a lot of it feels very conspicuous. The conspicuous status symbols of the expensive cars and certain things. So part of what I think escapes the consciousness sometimes of people who are caught up in doing well or wanting to achieve a lot of wealth is all of the inequality that is created as a part of that. I know our region has become increasingly unequal over time. The high school that I went to, even when I was there, was probably one of the most unequal high schools in the country. I'm sure now that's even more the case because you've got people whose parents are multi-millionaires and people whose families have very little. It's a region of high wealth and high poverty, the underbelly of progress and success in tech is that not everyone's brought along. It does improve our society in certain ways. There's a lot of good that has come out of it, but I don't feel like that's shared. And I think that's such a loss. It's not talked about, I feel like, to the degree it should be and needs to be, because when we have these levels of inequality, the instability that's created by that hurts everyone. Obviously, it hurts the people, the lower income folks the most, but it creates a lot of issues in our society that are not good for any of us.
I want to ask a question about that. But before we go there, I'm curious, Marianne, you said that your career focus has trickled into your family conversations about money. And I'm wondering, how has it worked its way into the decisions that you make about how you're using your money?
Just this week, I think our local food bank funding's been cut from them, significant funding. So I was thinking about, oh, this is a moment where we need to think about where we want to put more of our resources, both money and time. There's always need, but in particular moments, there's extra need. And so I started to think about that a little bit more. However, we wanted to donate something or invest in our community and build community, I think is pretty important, especially vis-a-vis the inequality I'm talking about. The other side of this is there's people who are so inspirational and creative in the organizations that they start to address some of the things, particularly in my community. My kids are older now. I feel like I can breathe again. So feeling like I can think about even investing in that way myself. So it's interesting that you asked me that because just this week I was like, oh, I think I'm ready to actually do more.
And I'm glad you're bringing up the fact that it's not just with your finances, it's with your time, it's with your expertise. You have so much beyond financial capital that can really address some of the inequalities that you're talking about. So this does make me wonder, what are ways that our society could help close that inequality gap to create more of that middle class and rise people up?
We know the social policies that will get us there. This is more a question of the political will. I think our country's been having this larger discussion about when we had a lot of manufacturing, we had more good jobs, we had, middle class households, and that was good for communities and families and things like that. And this idea that if you just have manufacturing jobs, you'll somehow recreate that.
It's a bit nostalgic.
It's nostalgic, one, because now we have the robots for the factories and things like that. But it skips over the fact that really it was less the manufacturing and more the social policies that were wrapped up around that. So We used to have, much stronger unions. There was collective bargaining. So when unions worked out a contract with the employers, that became a standard, a social norm around what other companies would pay people and the benefits that they would give them. So that's a really big one. There's been this hollowing out of the middle class, and we've been unable to enact the kinds of policies that would have prevented that or allow more people to kind of hold on to the middle class or to move up. And another area where it often comes up is just the cost of higher education. If your parents can't pay for it and you're on your own, or you have to pay for some of it or whatever, as we know, people are really weighed down by these loans that just strike me as quite excessive. I think the goal should be to have as many people as we can get the education that they want and to make it as accessible as possible. And we haven't been able to figure that out, despite other countries figuring that out. Same with healthcare. I mean, we have way more healthcare options than we used to, and way more people have coverage, but too many people are still finding themselves with a lot of medical debt.
And it's way more expensive in our country than it is anywhere else in the world.
We call it American exceptionalism. For anyone who's listening is interested, I mean, there's a whole historian study it, sociologists study it, but we're very different. We've organized our society in a very different way than other countries have. In many ways, we're not better for it. Again, when you have very high economic inequalities like the levels that we have, it doesn't bode well for security or stability, or we see a lot of polarization, things like that. We'll see what the future holds. It's not that we don't know what to do. Is that we haven't enacted the policies that would enable us to have less inequality.
And it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. You referenced your husband and you and having some differences in how you're raised around money. From a listener, it doesn't sound extreme differences, but I appreciate that. When you're in a marriage making these decisions, it's hard. How do you two have money conversations?
There's sort of an arc to it. How long you've been together and what were the decisions that you had to make early on. And in our case, I was a student when we got married. So I didn't have much to contribute. In our case, and in many others, there's also, you layer gender on top of that. In still more families than not, the husband earns more than the wife among straight couples. That's changing, and it has in significant ways, but it's still like a higher proportion. We're pretty similar and pretty aligned on what our financial goals are and things like that. I think where there's more conflict and stress is around trying to support each other's careers at the same time as how are we going to afford the massive cost of daycare? How are we going to do all these things? I think I'm perennially frustrated by the fact that he earns more than me, even on my best years.
Say more about that.
This is just the capitalist logic of the value of social science versus the value of business. The way I walk through the world, everything's socially constructed. And when occupations that are dominated by women tend to be paid less. So there's like always stuff that comes up when it's not really particular to him or even me. It's just the gendered world we live in. I'm so glad I'm a sociologist for so many reasons. I think there's some traps you can get in because of how gender looms large in our thinking about money, and particularly within families. I've noticed this just in my personal life, talking to people, but scholars will note too that often a woman will say, daycare is eating up my entire income that I'm bringing in. It doesn't make financial sense, is sort of the framing that gets invoked. Notably, that almost never gets used for men. And that's because we have the societal narrative of women being the best caretakers of their children. And I'm not opposed to spending time with children or taking time out of the workforce to do that. It just tends to be where people go to do their sense making about what should we do given these costs. And I know sociologically that it's much better to stay in the workforce and that you can't really think about it for just those years because you're employed much longer than those years. But unfortunately, when anyone moves out of the workforce for some period of time, getting back in, there's all kinds of long-term consequences of that. What feels in the moment like it's the most economically rational decision has, unfortunately, very often negative consequences downstream for women's lifetime earnings, their ability to move up their ladder in their career. And I think for women, the guilt that comes along with working. So many women, including myself, have felt like I'm not doing a good enough job at home and I'm not doing a good enough job at work. And you just get into this box of guilt.
Lose-lose.
Like a mental trap.
Yeah, lose-lose. So I'm thankful I'm a sociologist because it helps me manage my emotions through that and understand it's fine to work. Your kids are fine. We actually have evidence to support it that working mothers' kids do just fine. And in fact, girls often do better, depending on what measure we're talking about. So I don't think me and my husband have had a ton of conflict around the big stuff. The other side of it is in my book, I talk about how families have security projects. They're sort of all similar up and down the class ladder, except a family has to make their way. But of course, what an affluent family thinks about paying for their kids' college education looks very different from other families. But when you are the person who earns more in the relationship, there's a lot of stress that comes with that as well.
What is the stress? I want to make sure we don't gloss over that.
Keeping the money coming. We know job tenure is down. People, they're switching jobs, but people also lose jobs. And we have different economic cycles. And then if you're the person in the family who's earning more of the money, you're on the hook for that. And that comes with a whole toll as well, and a whole psychological and emotional burden. There's just a lot that's put on the couple. I wrote my book and then we had all these things happen. Our kids were really little. And I was like, oh, we need more gratitude around the management of the security project. It's really hard when both of you are maxed out doing the work family thing to kind of find that thought to be like, oh, hey, thanks for dealing with this. I'm sorry I don't earn as much as you, but it's a mutual appreciation that has to be there. I think there are definitely times where I wasn't expressing my gratitude sufficiently.
I appreciate you bringing this up, and especially your perspective of looking at these things as systems, as opposed to just individual decisions that people make on their own, because they're making them within the overall system, which adds, I think, some good cushion and padding to the decisions we all make.
I think I only know how to think from a systems level at this point because I'm a few decades in on this career, but it's really that macro system that seems so far away that is shaping that fight you're having with your husband, or is shaping you're really stressed out that your kids aren't getting the grades they need to get into that whatever school you think is going to be good for them because that will enable them to get a good job. The feelings of anxiety and stress that we have around that are not coming out of nowhere. It's coming from this larger economic and social system that we're in, which is, again, shaped by inequality. The affluent parents that I studied, they would not have been so stressed out about what their kids were doing if not for their concern about larger macroeconomic trends and issues. The individual things that we're experiencing are just individual moments of much larger social systems and social problems. Again, that's why I'm so grateful that I'm a sociologist, because it almost gives that perspective, lightens the load a little bit, or helps me make sense of it in a different way.
Yeah, it's great framing. Marianne, tell us, what's your next money conversation going to be, and who's it going to be with?
My oldest, she's an entrepreneur, which is new territory for me. And she's starting a business, I think it sounds like.
So fun.
Whatever kids get interested in, you become interested in. She was like super into selling Girl Scout cookies back when we were in Girl Scouts. And so I've just kind of seen her evolve in particular ways around business, frankly. This comes back to some of the things we've talked about. My husband and I will have to determine what's a reasonable amount of money to start up a 16-year-old business. I don't know. She's so passionate and has such a clear vision. And I always want to bet on her. I just want to support that. We are early on in our first few forays into whatever we're going into. It's hard. That's where we learn our lessons. What are the costs involved here? That's probably the next series of conversations, because that'll probably be happening over the next few months.
Not just conversations, such learning, such richness there. It's real versus I'm doing a study for school or a project for school and I got to come up with some fake business. This is real stuff and it's going to impact the family.
It's exciting.
Marianne, this is beautiful. Would you share where's the best place for listeners to find you?
MarianneCooper.com. If you just Google that or Marianne Cooper Sociology, you'll find me.
Thank you so much for bringing your whole self and your sociological lens on this Money Tales conversation. It was outstanding.
Thank you. It was a really fun conversation.
Thanks for listening to the Money Tales podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, share it with someone you think would benefit from listening. And leave us a review on your favorite podcasting platform. Your ratings and reviews help more people find our podcast. If you're inspired to gain clarity and peace of mind about financial matters, don't hesitate to reach out to our team at Asperient. Go to asperient.com/start a dialogue. Or you can email Sandy and me at podcasts@asperient.com. See you next time.